What's up, guys? It's me here. Welcome back to the channel. On March 29th, 2006, a black Lexus was driving south down the Las Vegas Strip towards the MGM Grand. Inside were two men, Anthony Reynolds and his associate David Kirby. They had just left a meeting with the Lucchese crime family at a nearby hotel. They talked about Tony, the planned expansion of the Genovese crime family into Las Vegas, an expansion that would be led by none other than TJ himself. As they approached the turn onto Tropicana Avenue, a black Chevy Malibu pulled up alongside the Lexus and several shots were fired. One of them hit Tony in the head and he slumped over in his seat, bleeding profusely. The shooter then jumped out of the Malibu, ripped off his mask, and threw it inside before speeding away. Paramedics arrived shortly after, but there was nothing they could do. TJ was pronounced dead on arrival. His body was then returned to New York, where he was buried next to his parents in a Staten Island cemetery. He was only 43 years old. This was not the way he envisioned his life ending. In fact, this was the way he had always envisioned his life. As one of the most feared mobsters in America, Thomas James Reynolds grew up idolizing the Mafia. He read all their books, watched all their movies, and knew every story he could find. His heroes weren't actors or athletes. They were mobsters like Lucky Luciano, Frank Castellano, and Paul Varillo. By the time he was a teenager, he had already decided that if he couldn't be a mobster, he might as well be dead. This is Cold Eyes. Warm gun. Let's get into it. Thomas James Reynolds was born on May 8, 1962, in Brooklyn, New York, to Italian immigrant parents. His father worked as a longshoreman, and his mother owned a small grocery store in Staten Island. They lived in a two-family house that Tom shared with his brother Kenneth and his sister Geraldine. Tom was a tough kid who fought often. When he was 12, he punched a schoolmate so hard that the kid bit his tongue off. "I wasn't an angel," he would later say. "I was a good kid who got into trouble because I was mouthy. If you disrespected me, I'd knock you out." His solution to everything was violence. And so it shouldn't be surprising that when he was 16, he joined a Bonanno crime family. A year later, he committed his first murder, taking out a drug dealer from the Lucchese crime family who was selling drugs near one of the Bonanno social clubs. Tom was considered a made man at the age of 21 and was assigned to the crew of Joseph Massino, who was also from Staten Island. By the late 80s, he had already earned the nickname TJ, which stood for Troublemaker Jr. He became known as the go-to guy for settling labor disputes in construction sites around New York City. During this time, he was also introduced to a young woman named Deborah Graffino, the daughter of a prominent Bonanno. They soon fell in love and were married a few years later. Together, they had 3 sons. Unfortunately for Tom, Massino was sentenced to 100 years in prison for racketeering, conspiracy, and murder. So Tom went to work for another capo named Vincent Viniosha, but it didn't take long for Tom to make a name for himself. He was violent, vicious, and ruthless. In 1997, he assaulted 2 people in a Long Island City warehouse for stealing money from a poker game. In 2000, he was shot in the leg during a robbery attempt in Manhattan. And in 2001, he was arrested for trying to extort $1 million from a businessman. Although he was acquitted, he was indicted again the following year for trying to collect an illegal debt. Realizing that he might end up in prison for a very long time, he fled to Las Vegas. Now, here's the thing. You can run, but you can't hide. Tom may have gotten away from the feds, but he didn't get away from the Genovese crime family, who accused him of stealing the $1 million they paid him to go to Vegas and set up a new crew. He knew he couldn't fight the whole crime family, so he called his old boss, Vinny Bacciano, and asked for help. Bacciano agreed to help him out, and soon after, Tom was inducted into the Genovese crime family. He finally had the backing of the entire family, and now he could start building his own crew. He opened a bar called the Sand Trap in the basement of a golf simulator on South Industrial Road. It quickly became popular among gamblers, and soon enough, the FBI caught wind of it. Wiretaps revealed that Genevieve's captains from New York were flying to Vegas to meet with Rinaldi and discuss illegal activities. Eventually, Tony was arrested again for running a gambling ring. But in a move that surprised even the FBI, Vincent Bastiano bailed him out. Later that same day, he was arrested again for planning a robbery at the Bellagio Hotel Casino. Again, Bastiano bailed him out. It was obvious that the Genovese crime family wanted Rinaldi in Las Vegas, and they weren't going to let anything stop him from getting there. Finally, in 2005, he was given permission to open a legitimate business in Vegas. He bought the Four Queens downtown, which was suffering from bad management and declining profits, with the help of his wife, Deborah, and her cousin, Anthony Spina. He turned the place around in no time. He brought in new food, new slot machines, and new security. Within months, the Four Queens was making more money than ever before. Unfortunately, the FBI was watching closely, and when the wiretaps picked up rumors of a planned heist at the Horseshoe, authorities moved in and arrested Rinaldi along with 5 others. They were charged with racketeering and conspiracy, and the FBI hoped that Rinaldi would flip on his fellow gangsters. But he never did. After all, he was a made man in the Genovese crime family. When he returned to New York for the trial, the FBI continued to monitor his activities. They learned that he was still in debt from the failed robbery at the Bellagio and that he was looking to make some quick cash. On March 28, 2006, he met with several associates at a hotel room. They discussed the possibility of infiltrating the lucrative world of high-stakes poker and skimming money off the top. They came up with a plan and put it into action the following night. On March 29th, Rinaldi left the meeting and got into the black Lexus with his associate David Kirby. A black Chevy Malibu pulled up alongside them and several shots were fired. One of them hit Rinaldi in the head and he slumped over in his seat, bleeding profusely. The shooter then jumped out of the Malibu, ripped off his mask, and threw it inside before speeding away. Paramedics arrived shortly after, but there was nothing they could do. Rinaldi was pronounced dead on arrival. His body was then returned to New York, where he was buried next to his parents in a Staten Island cemetery. He was only 43 years old. This was not the way he envisioned his life ending. In fact, this was the way he had always envisioned his life. As one of the most feared mobsters in America, he died before he could carry out his final heist. But who ordered the hit? Well, that's what makes this case so interesting. There are 3 possible suspects, each with their own motive. The first is Matthew Madonna, a capo in the Genovese crime family who Rinaldi had stolen money from. When Madonna learned that Rinaldi was planning to rob the Bellagio, he may have decided to take matters into his own hands. The second suspect is Vincent Bastiano, who had been sentenced to life in prison for racketeering and conspiracy. Some believe that he ordered a hit to keep Rinaldi from testifying against him at the appeals trial. Others believe that he ordered the hit out of jealousy. After all, he had helped Rinaldi become a made man, and Rinaldi had repaid him by stealing from him. The third and final suspect is Tony's wife, Deborah, who had been having an affair with Matthew Madonna. Some believe that she set up the hit herself and then tipped off the FBI to avoid suspicion. Others believe that she was simply involved in the murder plot. Whatever the truth may be, we may never know for sure. All we know is that on March 29th, 2006, a black Lexus was driving south down the Las Vegas Strip towards the MGM Grand. Inside were 2 men, Anthony Rinaldi and his associate David Kirby. They had just left a meeting with the Lucchese crime family at a nearby hotel. They talked about Tony, the planned expansion of the Genovese crime family into Las Vegas, an expansion that would be led by none other than TJ himself. As they approached the turn onto Tropicana Avenue, a black Chevy Malibu pulled up alongside the Lexus and several shots were fired. One of them hit Tony in the head, and he slumped over in his seat, bleeding profusely. The shooter then jumped out of the Malibu, ripped off his mask, and threw it inside before speeding away. Paramedics arrived shortly after, but there was nothing they could do. TJ was pronounced dead on arrival. His body was then returned to New York, where he was buried next to his parents in a Staten Island cemetery. He was only 43 years old. This was not the way he envisioned his life ending. But what do you think? Who ordered the hit on TJ and why? Let me know your thoughts below. And as always, thanks for watching.